as we start this meeting, and I welcome everybody to this Monday afternoon Toledo Rotary Club. That logo tells us we're going to talk about the Toledo Art Museum today, which ought to be very, very interesting. It's one of the jewels of the city. So I can't wait to hear what Adam Levine has to say. Moving the meeting along, we're going to start in our normal way with a reflection today from Mike George, followed by Maria Schmaltzered leading in the pledge. So,
dear God, never so precious are the things we love as when they are taken from us. We thank you, God, for giving us back the ability to lead our lives outside of our homes. In our confinement, we learned the importance of art and music, of bread broken with others, of wine shared with a group of friends. We rejoice in the ability to convene, to raise our hearts in prayer and praise together again as one body. As our world wakes up from its self-imposed slumber, we marvel again at your creation, imperfect and flawed, but wondrous nonetheless. We thank you for those things we took for granted, and we hope we will never forget them. Amen.
thank you, Mike George. Maria, are you there?
I am.
I can't see you. There you are.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Mike George. Hey, Maria, before you go off, when did you join Rotary? How long has it been?
Was it February? Maybe January or February?
Seems like just yesterday to me. How are you enjoying the club?
I am, very much so. Thank you. I'm glad that we have this virtual opportunity while we can't all be in person, so I can still be involved.
I think I recall you work at the University of Toledo.
I do.
What do you do?
I am the Director of Development for the College of Business.
Okay, are you going in every day?
I am not. I am still working remotely. A few people are going in the development office. Periodically, they take turns, but all of the restrictions are being followed. So masks, arrows directing which way you can walk. So many people allowed together at a certain time. So if people can work from home, they, appreciate us doing so at this time. And then the university employees, they're phasing back. I think they started a couple weeks ago, and we'll continue to phase back until school starts August 17th.
Okay, well, I don't know if you want to stay working at home or not, but have you, just one more quick question. Have you joined one of our Rotary committees?
I have.
Which one?
The Youth Service Committee.
All right, love to hear it. It's like music to my ears. I want to move on. I have to move on, and I want to thank our meeting sponsor for the entire month of June, Craig Finley. I don't know if you're out there or not, but I want to thank you for bringing venture visionary partners and making them our sponsor for the month of June. That's very important to us, so thank you very much. I understand that we have a guest, George Eistetter. Would you care to introduce your guest?
Yes, I would like to introduce a longtime friend of our family, Miss Kathy Miller. She is a longtime employee of the museum, and she's currently the development officer for Major Gifts. So there's Kathy, and she's a key member of the museum. Kathy, hello to everybody.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I work closely with Adam Levine, of course, our new director, Susan Palmer, a board member, and I don't know who else is on here that's affiliated with the museum, but I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to listen in today.
How long have you been at the museum?
A little over 10 years.
Okay.
Yes, December, it was 10 years in December.
Well, nice to have you today.
Thank you.
Welcome to our club, and please join us again. I hope you enjoy the meeting. Kathy Tate, I know that you got some things to say today.
I do. Wait a minute. No, I'm not muted. Thank you. So I just wanted to give a final reminder to anyone who may not have yet sent in their dues response for next year. I think we're doing pretty well, but it's a continued effort. There are 100 members who have not yet responded, and I don't want to make any assumptions. There'll be one more email this afternoon. If you have no clue what I'm even talking about, would you please just shoot me an email today and I'll wrap this up. It's really just about tomorrow is the last day of this year's Rotary year, and a new year begins July 1. And I will be sending invoices out for that. So please let me know, and I appreciate everyone who has responded. It's such a great help to have you do that. Thank you. That's it, President Tim.
Okay, well, I hope you get
I'm sure they will. Thank
you. Susan Palmer, how well do you know Adam Levine?
I know Adam Levine well. He's been at the museum for several years, and we're glad to have him back.
Is he a friend of yours?
I would say he is, yes. From working together and just, yes, I would say he is.
Do you think that you know him well enough to introduce him as our speaker today?
I hope so, because President Tim, that's what's happening.
Okay, you have the microphone.
Thank you, President Tim and fellow Rotarians. The museum community is pleased that Adam Levine has returned as the 11th Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libbey Director of the Toledo Museum of Art. Until May 1st, Adam was the George W. and Kathleen I. Gibbs Director and CEO at the Cummer Museum in Jacksonville, Florida, where in a little under 18 months, he raised over $11 million and increased attendance and membership by 20%. When Adam says work is his hobby, you definitely can see the results. Adam graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Dartmouth College, where he studied and majored in anthropology, art history, mathematics, and social science. He continued his studies as a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, where he earned a master's and PhD in the history of art. So, being his friend, President Tim, I asked Adam, what was it in these four areas? What made art history stand out for you? And Adam said he grew up in the Bronx, and his parents took him and his younger brother to museums when it rained. It was those early visits to museums like the Met and the Guggenheim that sparked his interest in museums. Then, as an undergraduate, Adam worked for the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College. And this is where Adam met Brian Kennedy, who ultimately brought Adam here to Toledo as a museum fellow. Now, Adam says that he has returned to Toledo not only for TMA, but also because this is where he and his fiancée, Brooke Brown, want to raise their family. Adam says, I love this city and want to contribute to advancing the museum and strengthening the community. What a great testimonial. So, fellow Rotarians, President Tim and Kathy Miller, let's welcome Adam Levine.
Susan, thank you so much for that introduction. Thanks to the trustees on the line. It looks like Susan and Pat Bowe is also on the line. Thank you, Kathy. Such a great colleague. Hope enjoyed you're here to watch my presentation. And also thrilled that we're running ahead of schedule. I promise I won't take up all of the extra time, but I probably will sneak into some of those spare minutes. So first and foremost, right, it is part of the museum director gig to give talks at Rotaries. Did so when I was here last time as a deputy director, did so plenty in Jacksonville. And it is my custom to always begin by thanking all of you, not just for having me, but for the extraordinary work that you do. Rotary is an amazing club that has moved the needle in so many various initiatives, both locally, nationally, and of course, internationally. And I look forward to joining Rotary now that I'm back in Toledo. So it's a thrill to be with you all, and just thank you for your commitment to making the world a better place. It is one that I share, and I know everyone who works for the museum shares. We view what we do as public service, and more about that in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to demonstrate my millennial credibility and share my screen using the magic of technology. So let us make sure that this works. Bear with me. Et voila. Can everyone see that, hopefully? Excellent. So I'm going to leave it in sort of slide share, or I'm going to leave it in this mode. I think it's just going to be easier to navigate this way. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Toledo Museum of Art, its past, its present, and its future. But I want to say a few things before we get into the slides. So the first is sort of discovered a couple of years ago that people think of museums as sort of these extraordinary edifices. Of course, people in Toledo care deeply about their institution and know how special this particular museum is. I think, though, one of the things which isn't frequently discussed enough nowadays is why museums matter. Full stop. Forget the Toledo Museum of Art for a second. Let's zoom all the way out and let's talk about the reasons the Toledo Museum of Art matters. Now, at Rotary, we have a number of individuals, right? All of you have been successful in your careers in many ways. So I think it's easy to think of the sort of business impact, the economic impact of the Toledo Museum of Art. The museum employs roughly 300 people, full-time and part-time. We have an operating budget of some $16 million a year. We've done economic impact analyses, so we tend to see a multiplier of 1.5 to 2 times our total spend on our economy. So we're generating $25 million of economic impact every year. That's great, but no one decided to create a museum to be an engine of economic growth for the community. You could argue that a museum is a quality of life amenity that helps with talent attraction and recruitment. This is sometimes called the ripple effect of the arts. Even if it's hard to do on a Zoom, but I'll frequently ask by show of hands, how many people have been to the museum in the past year? Obviously, not that frequently for many of you in the past 3 months. But what tends to happen is that while not everyone will consume the art museum, almost everyone knows someone who consumes the art museum. You may not come all the time, but you may have a spouse that does, or a child that does. You may value the educational programs that we offered for your children as they were growing up or as they are growing up. You may hire a graphic designer. The graphic designer may love to come to the museum. But virtually, actually, when they do surveys, 93% of people are quite persuaded of the value of museums as a quality of life amenity that touches someone in their life's private life, right? That is something that an individual that you care about avails yourself of. So that's a good argument in favor of the art museums, that they're quality of life amenity. But again, when the Toledo Museum of Art was founded and museums across America were founded, it wasn't with this notion that it was going to necessarily help attract people from the Northeast to Toledo, Ohio. It was really conceived of as a service to the people of its city. And this is a peculiarity of American art museums that I want to dwell on for a second. Art museums are considered, and were considered at the time of their founding, every bit as much of a public good as parks. And I know Dave Zank has spoken to this group in the past. Virtually everyone would agree that parks are a public good, that you consume them as a public good, right? As you walk into a park, you don't pay an admission fee, even if you do sort of pay a tax levy to support the use of the park. But the Toledo Museum of Art was conceived in exactly the same way, as an opportunity for people to avail themselves of something that will make their life better, their lives better. And it isn't for that reason that in his will, Edward Drummond Libbey asked that the museum remain free to the extent it was possible. And since its founding in 1901, the Toledo Museum of Art has been free every day and sort of distinguished from many other attractions in the region, and not dissimilar from some other Midwestern museums, is free without any real public support. No tax levy, no appropriation from the federal, state, or local government. It's an extraordinary legacy of caring deeply about engaging people with art because of the belief that art is good for you. But what is also important in this opening slide is to note that I refer to the museum not as the Toledo Museum of Art, which of course it is, but in the possessive, as Toledo's Museum of Art. Because if you were to think about museums all over the world, it is a distinction in this country that museums are municipal. Museums are civic. Museums exist to serve their particular local and regional community. It is the Toledo Museum of Art. It is the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, or the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or the Art Institute of Chicago, or the Cleveland Museum of Art. It is not the British Museum or the National Gallery. While we do have a National Gallery, that is just one of 240 museums in the Association of Art Museum Directors. And as a native New Yorker, it is true that New Yorkers are the only people arrogant enough to name their museum the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But even that is sort of a New York gesture towards naming a museum right after their sense of their urban area. It's a very interesting distinction that in America, museums are meant to serve their city. And just as cities are dynamic, so too must museums be dynamic to serve the evolving needs of their city. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is sort of level setting us all at the outset into this notion that museums matter because they are meant to create public good. And that public good is achieved through serving a city, in this case, or region, in this case, Toledo in Northwest Ohio. So I'd like to unpack how the Toledo Museum of Art came to be, the various iterations of the institutional evolution towards serving that highest and best use for the city of Toledo and the Northwest Ohio region, and what that points towards for our future, especially as we manage through this time of incredible uncertainty. So with that, let us dive into the presentation. And I think we're going to have a lag periodically as I try and navigate through the slides, but hopefully it will catch up. Okay. This is an image of one of those national museums, nationalized museums, where the collection is literally owned by the state. This is a picture of the British Museum, which was founded in the 1750s, and in some ways, right, in a very British way, articulates the essence of what art museums are about. So the British Museum was founded to provide entertainment for the curious and education for the studious. So at its core, art museums were always about engaging people in learning, but also engaging people in having fun, engaging people in enjoyment. This is a leisure time activity. We are in the market for helping people make memories. We are not just simply in the market to teach people. It has to be fun as well, and we'll come back to that. The British Museum was not the first museum founded. It is one of the great museums of the world, of course. But the earliest museum was founded in Basel, Switzerland in the 1660s, the earliest museum as we know it today. And then just up the road from London and Oxford, the Ashmolean Museum was founded just a year later, 1663 and 1664 respectively. And the notion of the public good that these institutions sought to serve is sort of best captured in this book by Carol Duncan called Civilizing Rituals. There was a sense in which art museums were meant to provide education and to elevate the public that walked into these edifices that looked like Greek and Roman temples. And this is the history of museums, which is so contested and frankly problematic. This is the reason that museums are sites of conversation and controversy and protest in this current moment. This is a difficult historical legacy. And as we look at the legacies of so much of the colonial residue of how European and American society was formed, museums have to grapple with this reality. And it is something that you can expect museums to have to grapple with for some time into the future. This narrative is only part of the story, though. The other part of the foundation of museums is that they were also meant to be sites for engaging one's senses. And this is actually part of the history which has only recently been excavated by a number of scholars across the globe. But when you walked into the British Museum in the 18th century, it was not a quiet, reverent space where you would stare at works of art on a wall. Hardly. It was a place that had din. It was this cacophonous mess of people who were having fun, who were frankly touching things, not that that's something we necessarily want to go back to, and in some instance, tasting things as well. So this is a history that my predecessor, Brian Kennedy, spoke an awful lot about, the idea of engaging the senses with museums. And you'll see that this is actually part of an architecture, right, a sort of ideological architecture that existed from the foundation of museums. Now, this is the backdrop against which the Toledo Museum of Art was formed. The Toledo Museum of Art has an extraordinary building, this Beaux Arts building, about which we'll talk more in just a bit. And it was responsive to these great museums of Europe. And it incorporated into it its ideology, with its problematic baggage, but also with its aspiration to serve as a public good. And it is that aspiration which is still leverageable, which is still salvageable, and which has gone through a number of different interesting iterations in the history of Toledo. So as we know, the history of Toledo in many ways begins in 1888 with Edward Drummond Libbey's decision to relocate the New England Glass Company and rename it Libbey Glass Company from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Toledo, Ohio. And Edward Drummond Libbey was a great showman. And in 1893, at the World's Fair, he built an entire glass factory in Chicago. And this is a rendition of their pavilion, which was obviously no inexpensive undertaking. And it was sort of one of the phenomena of the fair. Within the factory, there was a furnace room. This is an area where you see dozens of Libbey employees etching glass. At the time, Libbey was known for his very expensive etched glass. The Libbey punch bowl that we have here would have retailed for the equivalent of $50,000 in 1890s dollars. It was $2,500 at the time. So these were extraordinarily precious, very expensive luxury products. It was only as Michael Owens, right, whose name is still affiliated with some of our great companies here, developed other technologies that were automated and automatable, that Libbey moved into more mass market products. But even in 1893, the basis for some of these technologies, the basis for some of these innovations was present, although Libbey was still very concerned with using those technologies to create luxury wear. Here, for example, you see Princess Eulalia, a Spanish princess, wearing a dress that Libbey made entirely out of glass wire. So this is how fiberglass was used. This is how the insulation at Owens Corning was first used to make a glass dress for a princess of Spain. And this was, as you can imagine, quite the phenomenon in 1893. So Libbey has created this company, right? And while there is huge innovation that is to come as Libbey moves into bottling and jar making, Libbey is very much concerned with the notion of design at the outset. And as he seeks to create a company that will endure, leveraging the natural gas prices, leveraging the centrality of Toledo, leveraging all of Toledo's competitive advantages, which is why he moved the company. As he tries to build an innovative workforce, it occurs to him and to his wife, Florence, Scott Libbey, who was instrumental in engaging him with the arts in the first place, that having an extraordinary art museum would benefit his business. His notion was, if I can expose individuals to the very best design, then I will always retain a competitive advantage. So from the founding of the institution, there was this interest in education, but it was specifically oriented to design and to quality. This is one of the things which is baked into TMA's DNA from the very beginning. And while we frequently talk about Edward Drummond Libbey and Florence Scott Libbey in the same vein as the museum, indeed, right, my title is named after them, there were other founders of the museum, including, for example, Arthur Secor. Arthur Secor was extraordinarily passionate about this idea that the museum focus on artworks and architecture of the highest quality. And in fact, Edward Drummond Libbey said to him early on that he was nervous as they were building this building in which I now sit, that they wouldn't have good enough works of art for the building. And Arthur is said to have told Edward Drummond Libbey, well, Ed, hell, just tell me what you want to buy and I'll buy it for you. So Ed was very committed to making sure that the works of art in the building stood up to the architecture. And of course, no one person or no two people can do it on their own. So it was a whole group of individual philanthropists who band together to create this great institution. But this notion of quality is really core to the Toledo Museum of Art. And I want to sort of put it to you this way. So I began my career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which of course has, is a very large edifice, but so is ours. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is 1 million square feet. The Toledo Museum of Art, including the glass pavilion, has about 320,000, 330,000 square feet. So we're a third the size of the Met. And yet the Met has a collection of more than 1 million objects, and the Toledo Museum of Art has a collection of a shade under 30,000. We have always been focused on artworks of extraordinary merit. We've been very selective in our aesthetic appreciation of the artworks that we collect. And for all the reasons we've already discussed, the European legacy of collecting, the British Museum and sort of the British ethos to how museums ought to operate, we've been particularly focused on European and American artworks, and more recently have sought to diversify our holdings. But at the core of the institution is this belief in quality, only the very best. And we'll return to that again and again. But the real reason for this focus on quality was Libbey's conviction that if we expose people to the highest design, then it will create innovative thinking, which of course would benefit his business interests. But, and this may sound familiar, in the face of oncoming automation, remember, this is the guy who figured out how to automate glass bottle production and monopolize that market for a decade. He could see that technology was going to displace human work, and he believed design conferred a competitive advantage. So if this sounds familiar, it's because it is, right? There's nothing new under the sun. So this is an image of our facade, right? It looks fairly similar, although this is taken in 1912, shortly after the building was completed. This is the same Toledo Museum of Art that you see today, although subsequently we have added on 2 wings. First, the education wing in the late teens and early 20s, and then the peristyle, which was constructed between 1929 and 1933. So initially the museum, fronting Monroe Street, was just this central structure constructed by Edward Green Architects, who also the architect that constructed the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo. The museum was clad in Vermont marble because Arthur Secor decided that he was going to give $100,000 personally, right? Remember, this is sort of 1910 dollars, to ensure that this great building also had the very best material. So this notion of quality was baked in from the beginning. But I think you can see in the way that the museum has evolved that while we remain committed to quality, the museum has also endeavored to keep up with the times. So in the late 80s and early 90s, the museum constructed the next great building on its campus, Frank Gehry's Center for Visual Arts, which is the home to our great partners, University of Toledo. Their arts faculty are there. And of course, this is an incredibly important building in Frank Gehry's architectural history. And what another sort of common thread of TMA's history is part of the way we are able to get quality is because we buy early and we buy against the market. So we were able to afford Frank Gehry because this Frank Gehry building is fairly early in his career, long before the Los Angeles Opera House, long before the Sydney Opera House. But you can see, if you look at his earlier work, that he is on the way here. This is very much a bridge piece in his architectural portfolio as he moves from a more brutalist style to his more sort of postmodernist style. And then, of course, in 2006, we opened our glass pavilion by Sejima Nishizawa Architecture Associates, by Sana, their first building in the United States. And I wanted to show you this image for 2 reasons. One is you frequently think of the glass pavilion as this gorgeous, striking, transparent facade, but we frequently don't think of it as being nestled into its neighborhood as appropriately as it is. There was great sense given to the space around the glass pavilion, and here you can get a sense for just how nicely it sits within the Old West End, right, as it is seen through this aerial view. But you can see in the evolution of the architectural styles here, the museum has found buildings that actually do a wonderful job of complementing and cohabitating on our campus with the gorgeous Beaux-Arts building, which is the core of our collection. But the architectural style deviates with the times. We have buildings that really speak to the moment in which they were created. The glass pavilion, of course, speaking to transparency, to human scale, but really putting the visitor at the center, which is so much of what we're talking about nowadays in terms of whether it's customer behavior, whether it is the political conversations of the moment and individualism and individual identity. This move towards the individual is reflected in our architecture. So we've ended up with extraordinary buildings built by Pritzker Prize winning architects. It's the equivalent of the Nobel Prize of Architecture, and yet they are reflective of the time. So the museum has retained this belief in quality, but it has updated it as it's evolved over the years. Likewise, the same is true in our exhibitions. Many of you on the call will have been here in the early 90s when the museum hosted this blockbuster exhibition along with the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, The Age of Rubens. This was one of a series of major exhibitions that the museum curated or co-curated in the 80s and the 90s. And certainly recapturing and bottling some of that ambition in our exhibitions program is something that you can look to us to do in the future. But this sort of belief in expanding horizons, right, which is embedded in our mission statement, literally in our statement of purpose from 1901, has been leveraged in different ways, including by my predecessor, Brian, who brought this exhibition from the Brooklyn Museum, a magnificent single artist retrospective, just like Rubens' work, by Kehinde Wiley, called The New Republic. It was a smashing success. And of course, Kehinde Wiley's work directly engages with the artwork of Rubens. And for those of you who attended, you'll remember that as you exited that exhibition, you spilled out into the Great Gallery, engaging, right, Kehinde Wiley's work in the canon with Rubens, making the claim that Wiley's work is every bit as great as that is Rubens and everything else on the Great Gallery. And that is one of the powers of an art museum, right? An art museum is the entity that controls what we call the canon. If we put something on our walls, if we juxtapose two things, we get to make the argument that this is great and you should pay attention. As we seek to think about our history critically, doing exhibitions and thinking about our permanent collection displays in exactly the way we did with Kehinde Wiley's work is going to be so important. How we can take this notion of quality and make sure we view it more inclusively and more holistically. I'll say more about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then of course, everyone knows that the Toledo Museum of Art has always been committed to access and to education. I've already spoken about the fact that the Toledo Museum of Art has been free since its founding in 1901. And in fact, I mentioned Edward Drummond Libby's will. In the will, he asked that the museum be open for free at least 2 days a week and open for free every day if at all possible. And each successive board of trustees has sought to keep the museum free every day that it is open. It's a remarkable testament to continued belief in community service. The museum's education programs are second to none. We, of course, used to operate our own school, and that morphed into the collaboration with the University of Toledo. You see this remarkable lineup of various school tours coming into the museum in the 1940s. We're one of the first docent programs in America, and certainly the most rigorous docent program still in existence, celebrated more than 70 years in our docent program. And we were one of the first museums to allow children to visit the museum without an adult. In fact, George Stevens, one of the first really long-standing director of the museum, the one who did so much to make it what it was, instituted a child docent program in the 1910s. Really quite a remarkable feat. This belief in access and education has been updated, right, and broadened. Here a picture of the block party from several years ago. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the block party this year due to COVID-19. But this block party follows on a tradition of Juneteenth celebrations, which preceded it from about 2000 to 2010. And certainly you can expect for more of this type of programming to more of this type of activation of Monroe Street, activation of our campus, broad, exciting crowds that engage the museum, both for its art and for its educational programs, but do so in fun ways. I think many of you who have been to the block party will know that one of the sort of marquee elements are the performances that take place in front of the museum on this plaza where you see people standing currently. And that really speaks to Brian, my predecessor's commitment to this notion of making sure that a museum experience holistically engages all the senses, that we try and repatriate this initial idea of museums, that museums aren't places to stand in silent reverence of works of art. That's something which is totally lovely and worth doing, but they're places to have fun, to engage the senses, to learn through multisensory experience. So the analogy that I would use with a 7-year-old is it's a little bit like a pool, right? Sometimes you have lap lands, right, or lap time, and that's really important. But it's also really important to allow yourself the opportunity to play and have fun and engage in a more free-form kind of way. Museums must serve both purposes, and we have an opportunity to do so. Now, in addition to the block party, you saw us engage these things, especially during my last tenure, with immersive experimental exhibitions, whether it was Rebecca Louise Law's installation of 100,000 flowers hanging from copper wire, or whether it was our playtime exhibition, which took over the campus and had harmonic motion, that giant crocheted playground hanging in the same space in our candidate gallery. We really tried to create experiences that engaged all the senses. Now, there are good reasons for this. And as what you would have heard me discuss several years ago, the need for the senses is as acute as ever. This is a report that the McKinsey Global Institute put together that demonstrates that in a future where we are going to continuously be replaced by machines in the workplace, guess what? The skills that are not automatable, the skills that computers can't yet do, are use senses. That is the thing that differentiates humans from computers. Computers see the world in zeros and ones. We see the world through our eyes. We experience through touch, through smell, through taste. So the top 2 skills that McKinsey says are required in the 21st century are creativity, which everyone talks a lot about. And the second is sensory perception, use of the senses. So here we are, 120 years after the founding of the museum. And in some ways, we're exactly where Edward Drummond Libbey left us. That by engaging the senses, we can create competitive advantage in the workforce. But there's another thing that we've discovered about the engagement of the arts, which is on the one hand now quantified, and but on the other is something we've known since time immemorial, and that's that the arts are good for you. This now brings us back to our initial point around public good. The belief that arts are good for you is something that people like me have sort of long felt, because we can stand in front of a work of art and we can have a great experience. But now there's the medical field has glommed onto this and have started doing studies, and you can see here 2 very sophisticated sounding titles. But peer-reviewed medical research increasingly identifies the fact that if you spend time in an art gallery, you actually lower your stress levels, measured in any number of different ways. And the evidence is so robust that in Canada, you can write an anti-anxiety, anti-depression prescription for someone to visit an art museum. This is something that they're now looking to start doing in the UK as well. It's a practice called social prescribing. And while it would be beyond my scope of expertise to talk about how insurance will handle that in the United States of America, it is something that has a strong body of evidence underlying it. And it is something that for those of us who can be made to feel comfortable in an art museum environment, it is something that we know to be true. When we walk into a gallery space and the space itself matters, it's not just looking at the work of art on a computer screen. When you walk into that space and you're able to decompress in front of a work of art, you do in fact feel better. It makes you better. And that is an extraordinarily important thing for us to remember as we now conceive of what we do, what the highest and best use of the Toledo Museum of Art is, in what is a very uncertain time. So that's where we've come from, right? We've come through 120 years of history. I was here for 6 years at the museum, working under a brilliant predecessor. And the Toledo Museum of Art has very much been focused through its history on quality, on access, but on sensory engagement as well, and how specifically sensory engagement can be used to drive education, although increasingly towards the end of my last tenure with some awareness of how multisensory engagement can be used to promote wellness. So here we are in this very complicated moment where we have 2 ruptures, 2 huge dislocations to life as it was being lived just 6 months ago, 3 months ago. On the one hand, you see an image on the left of a socially distant set of art viewers, all wearing masks, right? There is a reason we are doing this through Zoom, not in person. We are dealing with a sort of terrible global pandemic that has had extraordinary and literally extraordinary, not in a good way, impacts on the labor market, on psychology, on physical health, right, on the economy. And we are going to continue to live through uncertainty until we have a vaccine. The museum reopened on Tuesday, and it was really important this past Tuesday, and it was very important for us to do so, to serve as a site for people to begin to engage with each other, but also to resume some sense of normalcy and begin to activate some of those wellness benefits I was talking about before. But of course, given the no justice, no peace, and Black Lives Matter movements across the country in response to the killings of George Floyd and so many others, we also have a role to play in that. And museums are contested spaces. They are contested for that history that I alluded to before. And as I've said to any number of people, I am so excited to work for an institution that people care so much about. It is a moment for us to be able to bring this community together and to pave a way forward for what the museum of the 21st century should look like. I firmly believe that the Toledo Museum of Art 5 years from now will not just be seen by those in Toledo as a shining example of how to lead this community, but I believe that we will be seen across the entire museum sector as the leader in figuring out how to use these two dislocations and use them as accelerants for change to create a more equitable, a more inclusive future that leverages all of the strengths of Toledo's history while also reconciling the historical issues that museums must contend with. So what does that look like? How can TMA serve Toledo now and in the future? Well, I can only gesture towards it because we do not yet have a strategic plan. We're working on it as a team. But there are 4 pillars that you're going to hear me talk about over and over and over again. The first is quality. Quality is, has gotten a bad rap, I think. And I think the opportunity for the Toledo Museum of Art, a collection that has always focused on selective, extraordinary quality, right, is to broaden and create a more inclusive concept of quality, but not to do away with it. So it is my point of view as a native New Yorker, right? I grew up and people told me, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. That is the type of quality that I think the Toledo Museum of Art should imbibe, a truly egalitarian and democratic view of quality. See, in New York, you can go to a Michelin-starred restaurant and you can argue about which is the best, or you can have a slice of pizza and you can argue about which is the best, right? They're just different categories of best. So the Toledo Museum of Art has imbibed the concept of quality, which is very European and very American, but there are great, exceptional things from all over the world. So how does the Toledo Museum of Art become the place where you tell the truly inclusive global art history, but you don't do so in a tokenistic or a representational way? You do so because it's great. Continuing this history of this commitment to access and authentically demonstrating above and beyond just making ourselves free, how we are going to help communities that don't currently consume the museum overcome threshold resistance, to consume this museum more fully. Because guess what? If visiting an art museum promotes wellness, then we have an obligation to this community to ensure that everyone who can attends. Relevance. I think one of the things we need to make sure that we do is balance our international and national ambitions with programs that are relevant to Toledoans and Northwest Ohioans. Sort of in this model, the dream is that we do an exhibition with the Louvre, and in Paris, people fly from all of the European capitals to see this very important intellectually rigorous show. But TMA has engineered that show, has co-organized that show with the Louvre, so that when it's in Toledo, people fly from New York and they fly from LA and they drive in from Chicago. But when you visit the galleries, next to all those tourists is everyone from every walk of life in Toledo, because we've touched something in that show. The theme of that show, the topic of that show resonates with what we are going through as Toledoans and Northwest Ohioans. That is a harder thing to do, but I think it is eminently achievable. And finally, joy. We need to activate all of the senses, right? But I think the way that we should do so is not necessarily in the service of teaching one how to engage your senses, but in the service of having fun. Right? So if you think about any experience that you do that you think is fun, with the exception of reading, which is very complicated cerebrally, almost all of them share two characteristics. They are social and they engage more than one sense. So by creating these multisensory immersive experiences, we will create a sense of joy. And that sense of joy will cause people to want to come back. And that repeat visitation is not only what drives our relevance to our community and frankly, our business model, but it also ensures, back to that point of access, that people get the full wellness benefits of consuming an art museum. So we're about at time, and I want to give enough time for question and answers, but these are just words on a page. I do want to, in 2 minutes, just show you what it looks like. So, it's so early, I'm 2 months into my job, but what, this all sounds abstract. What would it look like to really focus on quality inclusively, have an authentic commitment to access, regional relevance, and focus on joy? Well, this is the first acquisition of my tenure. It is 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall textile. If it looks like a painting, it's because the artist was originally trained as a painter, depicting Frederick Douglass, the most photographed man of the 19th century. But this is a 2019 artwork. The artist is an African-American female artist named Bisa Butler. She studied at Howard University. The bright colors grip you immediately. And as I said before, there's no comparing a work of art on a computer screen to the work of art in person, especially vis-a-vis scale. But you can tell already through the screen, this is a great thing. When you see it, when you turn a corner and you see it hanging, it punches you in the gut. It is so good. You just can't believe this is textile. You can't believe that someone sewed this. It's this extraordinary blend of stitch work and collage of bright West African fabrics that engages with issues of today. This is a work of art that is called The Storm, the Whirlwind, and the Earthquake. And it's alluding to an 1852 speech that Frederick Douglass gave in Rochester, New York, effectively saying, we have spoken enough about the demerits of slavery. It is now time for action. We don't need the gentle breeze. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. So it speaks powerfully to this current moment. It is by an African-American female artist, but the reason we got it is because it's great, right? That is the important point. This is not about tokenism. This is not about identity politics. This is about an inclusive view of quality. And if we seek beauty without bias, then we will end up with the Toledo Museum of Art collection, which is so great, and that it will do all of the things that are so beloved, and it will also tell a representative history of art. So this is an example of what it can look like. And then with that, so what I'll do is I will end on that note, as opposed to going through the final few slides. You are the first Rotary group that I've spoken to. So this is my first version of this presentation. So hopefully you'll invite me back in 2 years when I'll have more examples and it's a little bit more refined. But I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I definitely want to make sure that we have enough time for questions and answers, but this is an example of what an inclusive approach to quality can look like. And I'll end by saying that if we are able to focus on quality, access, relevance, and fun, then you will hear me say this over and over again. What we will do is we'll pioneer a model for museums in the 21st century, and we will be the consensus best art museum in America. When you travel anywhere in this country and you tell people you are from Toledo, Ohio, the first thing they will say to you is, I keep hearing about how amazing this art museum is, and I want, and I just can't wait to visit myself. That is my accountability to you, and I believe that we can deliver it together. So thank you all for giving me your time, and with that, I will turn it over for question facilitation.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much. Incredible presentation. Fellow Rotarians, if you have questions, you can raise your hand virtually and or just type into the chat there, and we will call on you and unmute you so you can ask questions for Adam. So I'll give it a minute for them to come in. I wouldn't be shocked if there are questions, Adam. I think you covered literally everything. You did an incredible job. And I will say, just as somebody who's gotten to know Adam personally in his previous stint with the museum, I was very excited to hear that you are back home, and excited to hear that you and your fiance are going to make this your home. So with that, we'll go to Keith Burwell with the first question. Keith, you are up on screen and you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for the presentation. Can you speak to everyone here about what you're doing, because you just kind of quickly highlight it and move on with the neighborhood work next to the museum.
Yeah. So
What's in the museum?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Keith. So that was actually the next set of slides. So, you know, as we conceive of access, one of the things you'll frequently heard said about the museum, or hear said about the museum, is that the museum is part of the Old West End. And that's true, but we also have to remember that I-75 is a pretty recent addition to the neighborhood in the scheme of things, and that the museum and the neighborhood that it served most immediately prior was and should remain a 360-degree view, whether that is east, west, or south. So while we open up across Monroe Street through our front entrance to what is now the Old West End, we are actively thinking through how we can engage Englewood, Roosevelt, Dorr Street, Collingwood, all the way up and all the way down from the river to ProMedica Hospital, and of course serve the whole region. But how can we make sure that we most immediately serve the community that is around the institution? I don't have great answers for you yet, Keith, but we are structuring the institution around community connectivity. That is something which is emerging out of our strategic planning conversations. And of course, we'll have to come up with our strategy and then a structure to follow it, probably early in 2021. But what you can expect is the museum to move from good intention and rhetoric to actual investment of resources and structure, and making sure that we are doing programming outside of our walls, constantly in dialogue with our community partners. And in some instances, this is returning to some of the structures that the museum had in place in the 80s and 90s, but doing so with more rigor, more investment, and frankly, more dialogue than imposition.
All right, next question is Richard Arnos. I think you are up on screen and unmuted. Go for it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. I think many, maybe most, maybe all of us would agree that you are a perfect example of quality and also someone who is early in their career that is appropriate to have at the museum. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Richard.
You were talking about engaging the senses, and I just wonder, when you go to a museum, one of the reasons it can seem so formal is, particularly for children, but really for anyone, there are 5 senses, and certainly sight, maybe hearing are often engaged, but touch, smell, and taste, particularly touch. I mean, if you're a kid, you're 8 years old, and you see these sculptures and you see paintings and you see it sort of globbed on, and you're told you can't touch that, you shouldn't touch this, you mustn't get too close, you can't do that. I'm just wondering how can museums truly engage all the senses so it's not 90% sight, maybe 8% hearing, and the other ones are just sort of minor engaged?
Yeah, it's a great question, Richard. So there are a few different answers to that. So one is, how do you engage multisensory artwork, right? And that's easier, right? Because you're working with artists who are literally thinking through how you can engage multiple modalities at the same time. And you've experienced some of those here, right? Whether it was harmonic motion that kids climbed on, right? Or whether it was the Rebecca Louise Law installation, even the Kusama Infinity Room that we have, right? Engages a different set of senses. So experiential works of art that are made by contemporary artists are certainly one way. But very much to your point, some of the works of art that we have that are not for touching and not for that type of engagement need to be brought to life. And there are a few different ways that you can do so. There are opportunities nowadays to create facsimiles, right? Facsimiles that have the same exact level of detail in terms of sort of the texture of the work of art. You can 3D print sculptures, right? Or small things and give them a sense of weight. There are obviously more digital interpretation options than there were before. And then it is worth remembering that the Toledo Museum of Art's founding included not just a commitment to displaying works of art, but also to literally arts instruction, is what it says. So how can we engage more hands-on activities in the gallery? So even if you are not touching the painting, how can we create a multimodal experience, an opportunity for someone to draw or or for someone to, do a puzzle or whatever, as appropriate from an art educational perspective, but how can we create those multisensory educational and interactive experiences in the gallery? There are a few different opportunities available to us, and we'll use different ones depending on the circumstance.
Adam, I think I'm going to have to stop you because we're running out of time. Based upon the number of questions that are in queue, that you've developed a lot of interest amongst our membership, and you've received lots of compliments along the way. Because I'm the president for the next few minutes at least, I get to make the final comments. And I want to just say a couple of things. When I was 13 years old, my parents took me to the museum and I was thrilled by it. And even though the room was closed, I was fortunate enough to sneak into the peristyle. And while that's many, many years ago, I thought that was the most beautiful room in the entire world. And while I don't think that anymore, I've seen a few other places. It's certainly very high on my list, and the museum has affected my life. The other thing I wanted to say to you is that for the entire time I've been associated with the Toledo Rotary, I've noticed that the Toledo's Museum of Art has been a fine partner, fine and generous partner, and I thank you guys for that. The final thing is to say that, again, based upon the notations that I've been seeing on chat about your talk, is that you are an engaging and an effective speaker. And I really appreciate what you've done for us today. And I hope you stick around Toledo for a very long time.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just saying thank you.
And thank you for being here on behalf of the club. We will provide you with a book that is the history of Toledo. And I expect that you're going to add to that over the years. And additionally, we will make a contribution in your name to our Polio Plus Fund. So today, you have helped us save a few lives. So thank you very much. And I can't wait until you become a member. This has been one of the honors of my life. I'm very proud to have served this club, and I want to be with it for many, many more years. As I said, I'll have a few more words next week as we switch leadership to Alex Dew and his new board. But I want to talk a little bit about the club. And I especially want to bring attention to all of the people who serve on committees. Committees are, in this club, are where the work of Rotary gets done and where the fun is. It's where you get to know people. It's where you get to provide the leadership that all of us are capable of doing and get to change our community and our club. I'm going to read the list I've got here because I don't want to forget anybody. But just thinking about the Community Services Committee, Kelly Train and Maria Ranker, thank you for acting as chairman and vice chairman this year. Disability Services, Rick Marshall and Roy Cherry, thank you for all of the work that you've done. International Services, Mike Noble and Ford Bennett, thank you for all of the work that you've done and the success you've had with the International Services Committee. Kurt Church and Heather Carnes on the Vocational Services Committee. You did some great stuff this year. Youth Services, Kendra Smith and Candace Harrison. I don't think we could have had anybody chair those committees. It would have been better, and you kept those committees very effective. Water Services, Sherry Budzinski and Jim Slattery, thank you for what you've done on that most important transformational project. The Peace Services Committee, Rachel Hobson, Marvin Whitfield, you got that committee off to a great start. I'm expecting great things from it. Thank you for your work, and of course, all of the people that served on the committee. The Finance and Audit Committee, chaired by Donna Bogan and Kurt Hitchner. Donna, I apologize. I told you this one wouldn't be too much work. It's been a lot of work, and you've stood up to the challenge. And Donna and Kurt, thank you very much. Membership engagement, Scott Hinshaw, Maria White, you've done a great job. Thank you. It's not been an easy year. This COVID virus has changed so much, but you've stuck to it, and thank you so much. Our marketing committee with Whitney Rothkar and Steve Miller, thanks to both of you for what you're doing. Mark, you've pointed how important, you have pointed the way to make us know how important marketing is. Our member development with Shireen Morard and Casey Hulk. Thank you very much for what you've done. The program committee has been outstanding, as all the committees have. Bob Savage and Stephanie Coleman, thank you for what you've done this year, and I'm sure I have not been easy to work with. You've made some tough changes at the last minute. You did a great job. We have a strategic planning committee with Alex Dew and Bob DiNardo, and of course our friendship committee with Chuck Mann and Hannah Murad. Thank you to all. You're the people, you're the engine that makes this club run. There are other committees, there are other people who have done lots of stuff. I just want to thank all of you. And with that, I am I'm going to close the meeting, but you got to wait for a second. Because for the last time, we are adjourned.